Thought experiment. I want you to think about the last name Washington. Washington. Got it? Now, this next question will only work if you have a diverse group of friends, family members, co-workers, that sort of thing. But I want you to think about something, okay? In terms of the last name Washington. Here we go. Do you know more people who are not black with the last name Washington, belonging to other racial ethnic groups, who are not black with the last name Washington, than you know black people with the last name Washington? In other words, do you know more Hispanic people with the last name Washington than black folks? Asian, Middle Eastern, white, with the last name Washington? A few seconds. Kind of struggling? I'll do you one better. I'll do you one better. Think about any celebrity anywhere in the world living today who is not black with the last name Washington. Go. Kind of struggling? Exactly. According to the 2020 census, Washington is one of the blackest names in America. Maybe I should have said it like that, but it's true, okay? Washington, pretty common. You may say, well, how can that be? We'll get to that in a second. So I am Reverend Dr. Bryant T. Marks Sr., founder, Chief Equity Officer at the National Training Institute on Race and Equity, and a tenured professor of psychology at Morehouse College. Right? At the National Training Institute of Race and Equity, we provide anti-bias training, broadly speaking, to a variety of partners, whether it's government, the private sector, nonprofits. So for those in our trainings, welcome back. Good to see you again. A little added content for you. For those who were new, welcome. Hopefully we work together in the future. But this channel is designed to provide high quality content related to sort of our anti-bias work, but from a social scientific perspective. All right, so trained over several 100,000 people the last few years, and we'll get to more of that a bit later. Going back to our issue or observation about Washington, the name, okay? You may say, well, how can that be? Let's rewind the clock a bit. So it's the 1860s, end of the Civil War. Black folks were enslaved, right? But Civil War ends and black folks are coming off the plantation, right? From one of the most horrible existences in human history, an American chattel slave. Chattel means property. No dignity, no respect, no status. Now, please understand, when black folks were enslaved, they typically did not have last names. Typically, they had the first name, right? And if they had a last name, it was the last name of the master. Master didn't like that. They got my last name. They're not really human, that sort of thing. So they come off the plantation seeking dignity, status, and respect. No last name for many of them. So they had to invent their own last name. Up until that point, what name in American history had more dignity, status, and respect than George Washington? So you had a disproportionate percentage of black folks selecting the last name Washington because of the positive traits associated with it. Booker T. Washington, look it up. Booker T. is in grade school. He didn't have a last name yet. Slavery just ends. They ask him, what's your last name? He says, Washington. Makes it up on the spot. Yes. Right? So names, like categories of people, could have traits associated with them. Washington, positive traits. Not an African name, but a bunch of black folks with the last name Washington. Why? If I said to you, think of a celebrity with the last name Washington, what do you say? Denzel Washington, Kerry Washington, Isaiah Washington. It just rolls off the tongue. Right? But non-black people, not so much. Pretty interesting. Name bias, folks. It's a thing. Homework. When you get a chance, just Google name bias on resumes by race. 20 studies pop right up, right? Here's your bottom line. It's been shown that resumes with ethnic sounding names, right? Jose, Malik, Aisha, less likely to be called for an interview than those same resumes with mainstream sounding names. Michael, John, Allison. Same resume, copy and paste it word for word, okay? Name bias. And the irony is we don't name ourselves. Question. How many of you named yourselves as infants? Exactly. Names are social. We get them from other people, but we have to live with the consequences of them. Please understand, there are tens of thousands of people right now in the U.S. at a systemic disadvantage when they apply for a job based upon a characteristic over which they had zero control. Their name, DC. Okay? So as we jump into this a little further, minimize ourselves a bit. This is part of our 3-part series, Break Your Bias series. Why are all, scratch that, most, scratch that, many, scratch that, some people are racist, okay? We're gonna address the specific question, what does racial bias look like in the real world? So we're still dealing with bias, right? this talks about the causes of bias, the case of race and racism as we push forward. So implicit and explicit. So for those who saw parts 1 and 2, thank you so much. For those who have not, please go back and check those out. It's going to help you understand where we're going today. All right, so let's go ahead and push forward, folks. So in terms of the levels, now I'm going to give you sort of a different take on these isms: racism, sexism, ageism. Again, racism as a case study, but it applies to these other areas as well. So we look at these levels, and folks, I'm giving this to you at a level that is layered, but I think you can pretty much get it. All right, so here we go. And I don't mean that to be insulting. I'm saying I'm trying to teach this to you because at graduate levels and so forth, they teach these things in a certain way. I think our skill at Entire is to make plain scientific concepts in a way that's compelling and sticks with people. So we have bias playing out, racial bias in this case, at the individual level. Right? So this is one person. So say, for example, there's one police officer in a department that has a negative bias towards Asian Americans. You say, oh, one person, that's no big deal. Really? One person over a 20-year career, say they like being on the street for 20 years. Depending on where they police, that one officer's bias can affect hundreds and possibly over 1,000 citizens. One person over time becomes a problem, can become a pattern, right? Because certain industries, you want zero tolerance for bias playing out, all right? So, but you might say one police officer, I get that. In terms of a whole department, you might say that's pretty good, and I understand that. At the next level is the organizational level. We have a group of individuals within a department, unit, or sector, okay? Like a police department. So say, for example, you have a police department and just 10% of them have negative racial bias towards Asian Americans. You say, oh, 10%, 1 in 10, not a big deal. Again, could be problematic, and we'll talk about that a bit more as we get into this next level. System. We define racism happening at 3 levels: individual last time, so there's intermediate, and then the more systemic. So this systemic piece sort of maps onto that definition previously discussed. Collection of interrelated organizations working toward a larger goal. For example, the criminal justice system comprises or consists of police officers, prosecutors, public defenders, judges, juries, probation, corrections. So you start with individuals, transition organizations. Now systems consist of multiple organizations. Now just say 10% of the people that make up each of these organizations, right? Each of these groups had negative implicit bias towards Asian Americans. Just 10%. Do you think if an Asian American had to go through the criminal justice system, engaging with the police, prosecutor, just 10% have some bias, they may have a different pattern of outcomes than other folks? That's what we're talking about here. Okay? Now let's transition to our next level, the ecosystem. Collection of systems that influence the overall well-being of community members, like city and county departments. For example, the criminal justice system, the healthcare system, the education system, social services. So it's a collection of systems. So imagine this. Imagine leaving your home every day. When you go out into the world, into society, bias plays out at small levels, but in many different spaces. You go to the bank, a little bit of bias by the banker. Go to the doctor, a little bit of bias by the physician. You go to the parent-teacher conference, a little bit of bias by the teacher. Just a little bit, but it's everywhere. Please understand, some people in our society are born into an ecosystem of bias due to no fault of their own. Just a package with which they present how they were born, okay? And then finally, we have cultural. This is sort of bonus in that it's sort of a integration of multiple levels. What do we mean? It's the individual and institutional expression of the superiority of one group's cultural heritage over that of another. Take the form of music, language, religion, beauty. This does require some power. Let's unpack this a bit, okay? What is beauty in the U.S.? What is American beauty? Do you watch the Miss American contest and say, that represents American beauty? That's the skin color, that's the hair texture, the hair length, and so forth. That's American beauty? Really? Music. Oh, the greatest music ever was Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, classical music. Who was on that committee? I like jazz, I like hip hop. Listen to John Coltrane in his prime, right? Listen to Black Thought freestyle. That's genius. Who's on this committee that determine what is the highest form of art, of creativity, right? But to the victor goes the spoils. So depending on where you live, the dominant culture and these aspects of the dominant culture may trickle down to other subgroups to the point where that seems like the norm and has higher status or regard. Not necessarily, varies by culture, but I think you sort of get the point. So we are acknowledging that the isms, right, to a certain extent can play out at multiple levels: individual, organizational, systemic, ecosystemic, and cultural. So we're going to focus on the individual. Our definition of racism could be at the individual level, right? For the rest of our time together, we'll sort of focus on the individual. I'll throw some institutional things in there as well, but I wanted you to see these patterns. My advice to you, pro tip, if you're going to engage in change, start with the individual and the organization. Start up here. So it's very difficult to change systems. You got all types of competing interests, budgets and egos and territoriality and people getting reelected, all types of stuff going on. So my advice to you, individuals and organizations, and that's sort of our sweet spot as well. All right, cool. Sorry. Before we get to this, now I'm going to show you what bias looks like in the real world. It's going to be a combination of some research as well as some what we find in day-to-day sort of activities. Okay, it's been shown that taller people are more likely to be hired, receive higher wages, right? Are perceived to be better leaders than their shorter counterparts. Yes, sounds crazy, right? All right, so the notion is, here's my advice to you folks. If you're short, you may want to look good, right? Just keep it tight. I mean, you go to the gym, you can work it out. You can be short and good looking, make it balance out. Folks, it's not me, it's the science. Also, fun fact, right? Throughout the history of the U.S. in terms of presidential elections, do you know that taller employees are more likely to win the presidency than their less tall counterparts or their shorter counterparts? When there's two candidates left for the presidency, the taller one usually wins. Not every time, but much more often than chance would dictate. Okay? Height bias, folks, it is a thing. Next, what do we know? Okay, all things being equal, yet a bit unequal. Qualifications being equal, that is, credit score, financial history, income, etc. Blacks, Latinos, less likely to be approved for home mortgages and auto loans and pay higher interest rates on loans when they were approved. And thus, check this out, are less likely to benefit from mortgage interest deductions when filing taxes. Please understand, bias has ripple effects. See, It's one thing, you apply for a loan, you're approved or not approved. It's another thing to look at the impact of that over time. Why? If you own a home, if you have a 30-year fixed mortgage, the first 8-9 years, it's all interest. So what happens? At the end of the year, you receive your mortgage interest statement that you give to your accountant. They factor it in to reduce your taxable income. You pay less in taxes if you own a home. But what if you don't own a home? Due to bias in lending, insurance companies, whatever the case is, you don't own a home. So now you don't have that savings. Folks, there's all types of bias in systems, even in the tax code. Like when you get a chance, I read this book, right? It's called The Whiteness of Wealth. It talks about the tax code and the racial bias in the tax code. But even beyond race when it comes to the tax code, you already know what the government values. If you want to know the bias in the tax code, all you gotta do is look at deductions and write-offs. And it's going to tell you what the federal government values. Why? They value people who start their own businesses, people who own their own homes, people who are married, people who are landlords, right? Because they want housing provided, so rental properties. You can see the bias in the tax code just by looking at these things in this particular way, okay? Next, what do we know? Previous performance being equal, right? Previous performance being identical. Kindergarten through 12th grade teachers have shown lower academic expectations and displayed less social comfort with Black and some Latino students and white students. Various researchers have found this over the past 50 years. The two groups that American teachers perceive to have the lowest academic potential, Black Latino boys, with the exception maybe of Native American boys on reservations. Okay. Next, what do we know? Check this out. Again, all things being equal, yet a bit unequal. Law firm partners found more errors and gave lower ratings of a legal research memo when they thought it was written by a Black versus white associate. Yeah, process that for a quick second. Let's break it down. Say you have a law firm. There are 40 partners in the law firm. All of them receive the same brief, right? And in this brief, there's some typos and grammatical mistakes, okay? Now, 20 of them have led to believe the brief was written by a Black associate. The other half led to believe written by a white associate. Same brief. What they found was that those who thought it was written by a Black associate caught more of those errors and gave it an overall lower rating than those who thought it was written by the white associate. You say, well, how can that be? I already taught you. It's stereotyping, categorization, and possibly implicit bias, maybe explicit. Let's hope it's implicit. All right, what do I mean? So I'm the partner over here, right? Okay, who wrote this brief? Okay, black person. We know the sign says if you were born and raised in the U.S. or been here for a while, whenever you see another human being, your brain in milliseconds will attempt to categorize them according to race, gender, and age, automatically in milliseconds, because our brains are built to be efficient, right? Thinking in categories is very efficient. Usually it works to our advantage and helps us. Sometimes it doesn't. I'm in the workplace. A black person wrote this brief. The traits I've come to associate with black people, especially the workplace, because I live in society and have a brain, those traits, stereotypes, not as intelligent, don't write as well, don't speak as well, this a perceived lower level of competence. So now it becomes a confirmation bias because I'm expecting to find errors given who the author is, and I'm catching every one. The partners over here, okay, who wrote this? Okay, white associate, okay, turn it in. Why? Because when the category for white Americans is activated, negative traits are not activated to the same extent, if at all. Okay, so I'm not catching many of those errors. Please understand, the same work product or the same level of performance can literally be evaluated differently in the workplace based upon who produced that product or who's engaged in that performance. The same quality, different perceptions, different evaluations. So now it's annual evaluation time, right? But say that perception, that differential, that difference happens a few times during the year. Now it's annual evaluation time. Black associate, white associate, right? But over the years, it's happened 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, where the same performance was evaluated differently. During that annual evaluation from their boss, who gets the raise, who gets the promotion, who gets the opportunity for the same performance? That's how this works. And these could all be good people, by the way. Not some grand evil conspiracy. These people living in society and having a brain, okay? What else do we know? People who show negative implicit bias towards Latinos are more likely to oppose both illegal and legal immigration. Hot topic there. See, what happens is some people hide behind this whole notion of, oh, legal, illegal. Now, folks, if people legitimately say, well, other folks should wait their turn before coming into the country, I get that. You go through the process. We are a nation of laws. I get that. That makes perfect sense. That is reasonable. And there are people who exist like that. But there's other people who have biases in general towards folks from Mexico, Central, Southern America. They don't want them here at all. But they will hide behind this notion of, oh, if it was legal, we let them in. But it's illegal, so we can't let them. No, they have a general bias. They don't want them here to begin with, okay? So this legal, illegal thing can play a role, but the implicit association, matter of fact, I'll take you one deeper. When I said to you the term illegal immigrant, who comes to mind? Be honest, who comes to mind? Mexico, Central, Southern America, people trying to come over the Rio Grande, walking through rivers, that sort of thing. Did you honestly think about the person from Europe who overstayed their tourist visa? Or the student from India who overstayed their student visa? No. According to Homeland Security, a full 1/3 of people who are here illegally, illegal immigrants, are overstayed visas. Look it up for yourself. But you're overexposed, you live in society, you have a brain, you're overexposed due to the media, right, to images of illegal immigrants looking one particular way. Not always the case. You have to just acknowledge that. Next, crime and circumstances being equal. Crime and circumstances being identical. African Americans and some subgroups of Hispanic Americans are more likely to be stopped, searched, arrested, receive poor plea deals, convicted, receive longer sentences, receive the death penalty, decline probation, decline a pardon. Folks, at every level of the criminal justice system in the U.S., race matters. And again, this is not some big grand conspiracy. The jury is 15 years away from the parole board. They're not calling into the future. Oh, when he comes up, don't let him go. That's ridiculous, right? But they live in the same society and have brains. They're overexposed to groups and traits. And many traits associated with young black males in particular, young Hispanic males in particular, tend to be negative. So if I'm on the jury, I'm the judge, I'm the prosecutor, I'm probation, I'm corrections, those same stereotypes may be floating in my head. I'm still a good person, but I've been overexposed to these associations, which can affect how I perceive, think about, and treat this particular group, okay? Next, what do we know? Okay, so like healthcare. A review of 42 articles on implicit bias in healthcare, all right, revealed that physicians and nurses show bias in areas of race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, age, mental illness, weight, HIV, AIDS, brain injured patients, IV drug users, disability, and social circumstances. Whew. Don't judge them. Do not judge them. See, there's a romantic part of you that wants to think, oh, doctors and nurses, they're in helping professions. They love everyone. They don't have bias. Don't have bias. Do they live in society? Do they have a brain? Of course they have bias, like everybody else. Now, we hope they have protocols in place to prevent their biases from playing out systemically, but we don't know that. Okay. Next, what do we know? This is sort of an oldie, all right, but it's a classic. Oh, by the way, all the science I'm showing you is current as of today. I'm not going to show you obsolete science, but I'll give you like one citation or so per finding as a sort of a seminal study, but I'm not going to give you sort of outdated old science, but this is sort of a classic, if you will. Check this out. Regular weight job applicants were less likely to be recommended to be hired for a job when they were seen in a photo sitting next to an obese applicant than when they were seen sitting alone or next to a regular weight person. Bias by association. Let's unpack it. Say I'm a hiring manager and I'm interviewing people for a particular job. I come out to the waiting room. There's two people left for me to interview. One is obese, one is normal weight. I'm about to interview the normal weight person. I bring them back. In that scenario, where that normal weight person was sitting next to an obese person, that normal weight person is more likely to receive lower scores and less likely to be hired than if they were sitting in that same waiting room by themselves or next to another normal weight person. You say, well, how can that be? I already taught you. Categorization, stereotypes, and bias. As soon as I walk out, I see the obese person. The category obese is activated, along with negative traits that are associated with that group by me living in this society and having a brain. The science says in this society, negative traits are associated with the obese category. It doesn't matter that I'm about to interview the normal weight person. Negative traits activated. Normal weight person comes back, those negative traits can get applied to the normal weight candidate, and I won't even know that it's happening. You could talk to me afterwards. Oh, did this candidate sitting next to the obese person have an impact on your judgment? I don't even remember who they were sitting next to you, right? Too, and I can be honest about that. That's how this works. So when people say I have no bias or it doesn't affect me, really, but it could be this slippery, bias by association. Okay, you keep thinking that. Next, what do we know? Let's talk explicit bias. We talked implicit for the most part. And by the way, folks, let me just make this plain for some of you doubters out there pushing back on DEI. If you have data in your organization that suggests at any level disparities, I showed you apples to apples, whether it's healthcare, income, criminal justice, whatever. They've done studies where already gave you the resume study. That's pretty plain, right? It's the same resume, different names, different outcome. Apples to apples, okay. When you have these disparities, there's only one of two explanations. Either it's implicit or it's explicit. That's it, right? Implicit is your best case scenario, that people are good and well-meaning, not knowing that living in society, having a brain has influenced these associations and they're applying them without knowing. That's your best case. Explicit bias is your worst case. That means people know what they're doing, right? It's intentional. That's a whole nother conversation. But if you are finding disparities and I'm showing you the ecosystem of them, if they exist, there's only one or two explanations, implicit or explicit. Now let's look at explicit bias, okay? Conscious bias, right? Because we talked about implicit, now let's talk hate crimes in particular. This is FBI data. FBI probably has the best database on hate crimes in the US, okay? So let me put myself out of here a little bit. Okay, there we go. And so in year 2022, they lag a year or two behind. This is 2022 data. So about 11,300 or so hate crimes occurring, over 13,000 victims. The way this breaks down in terms of target groups: race, ethnicity at 59%, religion at 17%, sexual orientation at 17%, gender at 4%, disability 1.5%. Okay, I'm sorry, sexual orientation 17%, gender identity, and then gender. Okay, so people say, well, why do you focus on race and equity? The National Training Institute on Race and Equity. This is why, right? Because the implicit and explicit bias science says, in terms of categories on the receiving end of bias, still race-based, and I'll talk about the different racial groups within it. But this is part of why we focus on race and equity. Okay, so we're not excluding that bias happens in other ways, but we have areas of emphasis, especially given my background and my expertise. Okay, so let's break this down a little bit more. Of the top 10 groups, we're talking hate crimes, top 10 groups in the U.S. Okay. Sorry about that. Let's get this out of the way. Sorry about that, folks. Hold on a second. Sorry about that. Okay. All right. So it's top 10 groups over time. Here we go. And this is 2022 data. Of the 11,600. Now, the way the data works is it may be due to categorization and so forth. The total number is a little different than the slide I just showed you, just by a few hundred, but the numbers I'm about to show you add up to this, so this is how it breaks down. Single bias, what we call explicit hate crime offenses reported in 2022. Okay, anti-black, African-American, 33,424. All right, so they are the receiving end. African Americans are on the receiving end of hate crimes more so than any other group. Followed by anti-Jewish at 1124, anti-gay male at about 1,000, anti-white at 966. That's not 1.0, that should be a comma, my apologies, a little over 1,000. Anti-white at 966, anti-Hispanic and Latino at 738, anti-lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, in some combination at 622, anti-Asian at 499, anti-other racial ethnic groups at about 400, anti-transgender at about 338, and anti-multiple races at 232. So this is our top 10 list. Explicit hate crimes. You got to understand, hate crimes, high bar. We're talking racial slurs, nooses, things that are very explicitly hateful and there's no ambiguity about it. Okay, this is our breakdown here. So when people say, you focus on race and you talk about, African Americans, this is part of why. This is evidence-based and data-driven. Not to the exclusion of other groups. We talk about many racial and ethnic groups. We talk about gender. We talk about these other groups as well. All right, so I do talk about these other groups as well. But in this series, we're talking about the case of race and racism from an evidence-based perspective. All right, folks, so in summary, as we wrap up here, we know we like to do these summaries. I am a college professor, so we have learning goals and summaries to keep things as tight as we can. So bias occurs, okay? Let's put this up here, okay? So bias occurs at the individual, organization, systemic, ecosystemic, and cultural levels. Today we focus on individual, organizational, systemic to a certain extent, but hopefully with these examples, you got a sense of how things are sort of playing out and where you may be able to plug in some solutions, which we'll get to in a second. Next, we learned that the basis of bias can vary widely, whether it's height, weight, politics. The focus was on race, but it's not just race. Any group of people with traits associated could be on the receiving end of bias. That's why I wanted to throw in those other examples as well, so that you know it wasn't just race. And then finally, anti-black bias is most frequently occurring racial bias in the U.S. at both implicit and explicit levels. Okay. All right, so folks, appreciate your time and attention. This is about to wrap us up. But coming forward next week, we try to release these videos every Tuesday or so. We're going to look at how can we break our bias. So yes, I know you've been asking for this. Okay, Dr. Marks, this is wonderful. I'm learning a lot, but what can I do? What can I do? Okay, so next week, I'm going to give you some concrete recommendations of what you can do. Lots and lots of homework. Some will be things you can do as an individual, as one person, just within your own power, right? Another will be more organizational, things that may require some practice, some policies, some cooperation from your coworkers. There's going to be a mix of those things throughout this channel as we go forward, but just understand that this is coming. How can we break our bias? So this is the graduation, one of several graduation photos from Morehouse College, where I work. Morehouse College is the only predominantly black male college in the world. I'll talk more about that as we go forward, but this is a wonderful picture and we like this. And this is going to be part of the foundation of how we break, like brakes on a car. See how that's spelled? Break, B-R-A-K-E, break our bias, slow down our thinking and our processing. All right, folks, thank you so much for your time and attention. Please check us out at www.national.training. Yes, .training, not .com, not .org, .training. You can learn more about what we offer, what we do. Again, anti-bias training. Our core entry is implicit bias awareness and mitigation. Highly compelling, highly engaging. We provide that virtually or in person. We have a series of other trainings we provide as well. And we sort of wrap that up to a certain extent with the retreat, but there's many different offerings and we want to be an asset for you. Also, we customize our content. So whatever your issue might be, we'll have a conversation and we can customize a solution to fit your situation. All right, with that, folks, peace and blessings. Until next time, have a great day.